The Disney Trilogy by SlimeBeast. Read by Agent Zero. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in the Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town, but Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. And then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to operate safely, and there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are just convenient excuses. Oh no, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from the Disney company actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. Then they showed the concept art. This gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women, in loincloths and tribal gear. Well, suffice it to say, everyone flipped out. We're talking about a huge Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern US. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the report at the beginning, but some insane connections between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk millions in and then split. The exact same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete, visitors actually stayed at the resort, the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so really, I only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog of all the crazy stuff he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there felt just as angry about Treasure Island as folks did here about Mowgli's palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's palace, take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article trying to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort. Or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. That had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was supposed to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know. Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather that their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I'd received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved into the beach in recent years, or old residents who sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's palace?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth, tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates, whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some past local or employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the palace were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of a jovial building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird crap covered whole swaths of his fur and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint had been peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had once been, someone had once again painted "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace, Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem interesting in any way. The kitchen, as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, now not even remotely cool, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so small and slow that it had been almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist and carefully letting go, but within seconds it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. What's odd, though, is that the toilets and the sinks, and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut the water off long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally, I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you. Then there was an unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced, why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace, again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all of my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell into the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the detail of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back toward the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down. My legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet, or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the abandoned by Disney motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. Using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would definitely have some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantingly steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall, something nobody else had apparently thought of, or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, even a punching clock on the wall complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old static-filled television and long rotted-out food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further and further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melded with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson flooring. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. However, try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when there was a slight popping sound and the door creaked slightly open. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used a camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like some strange cartoon cadavers hanging from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers toward the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor, almost like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black rays should be white and white rays should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot, just one of the bedraggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the hallway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know. I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I needed proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, that photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up, or whoever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled no over and over and over. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the skin wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then, the camera died, went blank and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. It then spoke in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice.
Hey, wanna see my head come off?
It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck, with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood. So much thick, chunky yellow blood. As I turned away, I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway, out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal, with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got any pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. It's been a while since I've written anything related to the Disney Corporation, and I'm sure you can understand why. A lot has been going on since my last post. I received a lot of questions and concerns from folks who read my first-hand account of Mowgli's Palace, a resort that was built and abandoned by Disney. I want to thank everyone who mirrored my post. It's been taken down from a few places, mostly corporate sites that were easily leaned on by a larger power. However, for every nuke topic or disappearing blog post, it seems like 100 more have popped up. This is something they'll have to face. There's no turning back for them. None for me either. I'm definitely being followed. For the first month or two, I chalked it up to paranoia. Any casual glance or half smile in my direction set me off, hair standing on the back of my neck and everything. The first one I was actually able to spot, was a telephone worker milling around my apartment complex. He was middle-aged, doughy, dressed just as you expect, but something just seemed off about him. I couldn't place it, but I knew this wasn't just my imagination acting up. He was awkward and out of place, not somebody who was comfortable doing his routine job. I followed him around a corner, only to lose him there. When I turned back to go home, there he was, staring directly at me about 10 feet behind me, expressionless and cold. "Exploring?" he asked. That was all he said, and there was an accusing tone to his voice. Tell me, what blue-collar phone jockey does that? I guess that's the worst part. Never feeling safe, never feeling alone. That and the occasional Disney merchandise left somewhere for me to find. Little rubber Mickeys in the mailbox, a Disney Adventures magazine on my bookshelf. They hide little Mickeys everywhere. 3 circles, 1 big, 2 small, and the silhouette of the famous mouse's head. I've started keeping a running list of Mickeys I found. Coffee cup rings on my coffee table, 1 big, 2 small. Colored glass bottles left on the doorstep, viewed from the top down, all red. Graffiti on the wall on my way to work. A huge earth, small sun and moon in the proper locations. They're everywhere. People have mailed me about this as well. If you're going to repost anything, I have to say, you're going to start finding those outlines. I guarantee it. The best one by far, one that actually made me laugh because of the horror of it all, was a drawing in chalk next to my car. I was taken aback at first, walking through the parking garage, keeping an eye out for people following me. The outline seemed a perfect match for, a murder victim you're probably familiar with if you read my past posts. Written in yellow paint, I'm sure, was a single word: retract. The only good thing I know that has come out of all of this is that I know I'm not the only one who's seen something they shouldn't have. I'm not going to give their names because, well, if I have to tell you why, you clearly haven't been paying attention. A researcher goes to Disney parks whenever he can, all throughout the year. He's not going to have fun, enjoy the rides, etc. He's looking for the gascots. There's been a long tradition, apparently, of people reporting strange patrons throughout the park. Silent, motionless, staring patrons of every age, shape, and size. Men and women, adults, children, and teens, all wearing Disney-themed gas masks. Way back when, Disney would get tons of complaints about oddly dressed folks following others around the park. Folks who would merge into crowds and disappear. Later on, the gas mask caused folks to draw other conclusions, and reports of possible terrorists and bombers started flowing. All of these reports most likely went straight into the trash can. I know I can't find any sign of such occasions reported on by the media, although you should be aware of the fact that Disney can control its press like no other. Researcher goes to the parks, talks to a few people, and tries not to draw any attention to himself. He'll just ask 3 or 4 families if they've seen his friend, who's wearing a funny mask. He has yet to see a gascot for himself, though on one occasion, a child pointed him towards Frontier Town. As he raced through the crowd, he heard a single voice ahead cry out, "Mommy, I want a goofy air mask too." A fellow I'll call lifeguard worked in a Disney water park from 2001 through 2003. He stood at the top of a huge water slide and made sure none of the kids got too rowdy. He passed the kids through one at a time, telling them over and over again to be safe, keep their arms in, and so on. One day, as he tells it, this fat kid goes down the tube, but doesn't come out the other end. He sent 2 or 3 kids after, The whole thing moves at a steady clip, so naturally you'd expect that if Fatty got stuck, the kids that followed him were stuck too. Not so. Only the big kid disappears. Everyone else comes out the other end, cheering and splashing like nothing's wrong. Lifeguard then shuts down the slide, much to the aggravation of the kids waiting. Before it can go through any of Disney's strict procedures, however, splash! Fatty finally comes out. Staff members pulled the kid out of the water. He apparently sank like a stone when he hit, his skin already blue and his eyes wide. All he would say was, "No face kids," and "Stop squeezing." The kid was okay, in case you're wondering. He got carted right off to the medical center. When Lifeguard was told to open the slide back up, he made a big stink about how it clearly wasn't safe. Despite his complaints, he was threatened with firing and begrudgingly opened the slide again. From that point on, he kept a closer eye on the kids. Every so often, they'd come out in the wrong order, never as stunned as the fat kid, but always with a vague look of concern. A dreamy half-stupor that seemed as though they were trying to figure out what was reality. They'd take on some water, choke a bit, and then they'd never come back up to ride again. I read his emails with the same sort of unease you might be feeling right now. I wanted him to share his story, but in the end, he didn't want to expose himself that way. Can't say I blame him. Snow White, which wasn't the actual role she played, was a character in the park. She had a nice little tidbit for me. You know what happens when a costume employee drops dead in his suit? Like one second he's taking a picture with little Jimmy, and the next he's had a fatal stroke. The second costume mascot in the area has to sit with the corpse on a curb or bench and wait for a designated dry cleaner to arrive and cart the body away in a discreet manner. All the while, patrons have no idea they're sitting with a dead body for photo ops. Feel free to check your photo albums at this point. That was bad, but another fellow, Janitor, went completely off the creepy charts. Disney World, and probably others, is built with a series of underground tunnels just below your feet. 3 stories worth. Anything and everything you can imagine is down there for the use of employees. They're called utilidors, utility corridors. Basically, that's the reason you don't see characters out of place or janitors wandering through the park. They pop in and out of hidden doors and travel a concealed town you're walking on. Janitor told me something that might be common knowledge, but was nonetheless news to me. Walt Disney had several apartments built into his parks. There's one above Cinderella's castle, there's one in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, they're all over the place. More than that, there are nightclubs, a movie theater, a bowling alley, and much more, all behind doors built right in whimsical facades you pass by without a second look. Club 22 is one such hidden area. If you have the cash to join the exclusive club, and trust me, you do not, then you'll have access to it and much more. Club 22 is a place where anything goes. Disney Co. calls these places dark zones, spots where the squeaky clean visage of Mickey Mouse gives way to drinking, drugs, and yes, sex. Conversely, the rest of the park is the bright zone, with a few gray zone utilidors in between. As far as Janitor said, it wasn't always this way. It was more of a slow decline in the gradual relaxation of social norms within that elite group. The reason he knows all of this? You may have already guessed it. He's cleaned it. After a lengthy background check and a non-disclosure form, Janitor moved up from a park attendant to one of the Dark Zone cleaning crew. Now, before you get some satanic human sacrifice vision in your head, Janitor saw nothing of the sort. Lots of empty alcohol bottles? Yes. Used condoms scattered like deflated New Year's balloons? Oh yeah. Oh, and he cleaned up his fair share of blood, piss, and vomit, but it was all down to the unrestricted behavior of patrons as opposed to any sort of cult behavior. At least that's how he sees it in retrospect. All that trash, that profane crap, went into a furnace and mingled with the smoke of a quaint cottage's chimney. If you've been to Disney World, you've been breathing in ultra-condensed sin. Backing up this information was Hammer. Hammer mailed me the old-fashioned way, though I don't know how he got my home address. He sent me photocopies of work papers proving his employment, with the instructions to burn them when I was convinced, which I gladly did. Hammer worked around the Disney World park doing demolition and construction. At one point, he approached a superior regarding some strange plans. There was a wide rectangular area marked off on the blueprints, about the size of a supermarket. The area was left unnamed and only bore the words, "Do not dig." Not only was his superior in the dark, but he was super purposefully in the dark. He didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to know about it, and ended the conversation with, "This space intentionally left blank." Hammer didn't get it. The area seemed a waste of space, and it was directly conflicting with the work his team had been given. He started poking around the area on his off time, finding only a derelict steel door, and a great span of concrete just beyond. It was a supermarket's worth of blank gray floor. Soon after, Hammer started picking gascots out of the crowd. And like all other reports, the people, the things, would just stand in full view of the guy. They'd just cluster together in the distance, or they'd be pressed against a wall when he turned a corner. He said they moved weird, like they were weak or injured, like a deer that's been run down by a hunter and can't flee anymore. The gas masks, the Disney character faces with filters jammed in, he noted that they seemed wet on the inside, like condensation on a car window. Tiny beads of water glimmered behind the glass, making it impossible for any of them to actually see. Probing even further, Hammer started asking questions of anyone and everyone who had been working in the park for a decade or more. He hit dead ends throughout, until he was directed to Ida, an elderly woman who worked in a restaurant on Main Street. She'd been there since way back, and though nobody had the balls to ask directly, everyone knew she had plenty of terrible stories to tell. Hammer asked about the empty space, then about the gas mask customers, and at first he thought he would receive the same non-answers he'd gotten so far. She was quiet. Eerily quiet. "Room 0, she croaked, a single shaking hand placed to her cheek as if she were a little girl fearing a father's punishment. She didn't meet the man's gaze for the entire conversation. Room 0, as it turned out, was yet another hidden room just like the apartments in Club 22. However, its sheer size and its spot beneath the park set it apart from any of the fun dark zones. It was a bomb shelter. Room 0 was built to withstand a massive attack, be it conducted by foreign or domestic enemies. It was to be stocked with enough rations to feed the entire park's average number of patrons at any given moment, and housed a smaller yet lavish panic room of sorts for hired Disney-ups. During World War II, official Disney gas masks were actually produced for children to wear in the event of an attack. The idea was that it would be less scary for kids if Mickey's face was emblazoned on the wartime safety device. Yes, I know the obvious problems with that. During the Cold War scare of the 60s, when Disney World was constructed, Room 0 was stocked with similar masks as well. Whether they cared about the fears of children or just callous branding, the things somehow found their way down there. What's more, some genius decided that kids would then be frightened by the gas masks their parents wore, and so all masks, adult and child, were made to comply with this insane standard. Ida described it as treating a wound with lemon juice. None of this explained what Hammer had been seeing, though. Not only the seemingly supernatural appearances, but the emptied-out room as well. "I've been in there," he explained. "There's nothing but a cement floor and 4 walls." "No." Ida shook her head and covered her mouth, stifling a sob. "You've been standing on top of it." Someone or something sounded the alarm one day when the park was at full capacity. The warning was clear. It was supposedly an air attack. Security ushered everyone down into the tremendous shelter. There, they were ordered to put on their masks and hunker down for the duration of the assault. Everything was quiet for about 30 minutes, save for the crying children and the frightened whispers. No one wanted to die, and so they were thankful in a way for this strange measure of safety. Then, the first scream rang out. "Hey!" a man shouted. "Quit pinching!" Waves of shrieks and yelps rippled through the crowd, from one wall to the other, back and forth. "Who's running around? Settle down!" someone hollered. "Who's laughing? This isn't funny! Ow! Who stepped on my foot?" Despite security guards urging to calm down and keep their cool, the crowd became more and more agitated, until finally, after nearly an hour of madness, the lights flickered, then died. What followed could only be described as utter chaos. In the dark, only the wails of the young and the anguished cries of adults could be heard in a massive swelling din that bloodied the ears of all within that black echo chamber. A group of staff members and a select few patrons made it out the door, ready to face the war above and the insanity below. What they found, of course, was a desolate yet untouched theme park. The music continued to play, echoing throughout the silent storybook towns. Upon returning to Room 0, the few who stood at the top of the steel staircase that led down into the pitch blackness heard no sign of the previous fray. There was only silence. Ida herself descended that staircase, despite the begging of those she left above. She reached the reinforced doors herself, now awash in darkness and hearing only the buzzing in her ears. A single voice came out of the darkness. The echo made it impossible to tell whether the mocking, raspy voice was at the back of the bomb shelter, or if it was right in front of her face.
Shut the door, dear. You're letting out the cold.
Gripped by terror, she did just that. Within days, the entire thing, staircase, shelter, all of it, was covered with feet upon feet of cement. Air systems and generators above its ceiling were removed, creating the large empty space. "They're all still down there," Ida told Hammer. "Down there with whoever or whatever that was." You might have noticed that I've used Ida's name. Unfortunately, she passed away soon after telling her story. Accidental fall, supposedly, after getting out of bed to turn on a light. Such a company devotee, the paper reported, that her entire room was covered in Mickey Mouse silhouettes. If you really believe in something, it can be yours. That's how we've been conditioned to think. Mostly, I suppose it's a coping mechanism to keep us from eating the rich. We all think we'll be rich someday if we just want it hard enough. How long has it been since there was a good old-fashioned culling of the wealthy elite? That probably wasn't a good way to start this blog post. I'm a little more than tired, but I don't care. I'm leaving it. Corrupt us. That was the subject of an email I received before my ISP dropped me. My phone turned into a brick the same day. Hell, I think it was the same precise moment, though it's difficult to know for sure since I only tried it after my laptop couldn't connect. Corrupt us. I'd never heard the word before, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure it is a word at all. It could be Latin, it sounds like Latin. I haven't been able to look it up, and this is the first time I'm getting on the web since my unexpected removal from the grid. I tried to sign on at the local library, by the way. My card was revoked, unpaid fees for books I never read, much less checked out. Mostly borderline fetish material and self-help books for various mental illnesses. The apparently quite detailed tome on weapons of mass destruction seemed to be of most concern for the librarian. I hung around the library for maybe a half an hour until someone left a log computer in and unguarded. When I went to check my email to tweet a complaint about what happened, those accounts were gone. Honestly, I was a pretty huge dumbass for expecting them to be there. It wasn't long before I noticed the computer's rightful user pointing me out to the front desk. I'm guessing she wasn't a fan of the direct approach. I was out the door before anyone could cause a real fuss. It's been 2 years since I left Mowgli's palace and never looked back. The original blog post has come and gone to so many different sites that I can barely even remember the first place I tried to host it. If I'd known how far this would go, I don't know if I would have been able to hack out that clumsy, flawed account of what happened. The pressure would have been too great, and I suppose there's a certain level of comfort in the idea no one will actually see or care about your work. It seems like a lot of sites remove the information, either upon direct request from Disney, or on fear of their own reprisal. I know a really popular YouTuber who pulled readings of my posts from his channel. The rumor was that someone threatened to sue him, some author of the story. Yeah, right. I know firsthand that he took it down in a bout of fear when he realized Disney's connection to his partner company. I tried to keep up my After Abandoned blog for a while. I don't know how many people out there saw my notes on Room Zero, Club 22, and so on. They're still around if you look, at least at the time of this writing. Yes, Club 22 exists. No, it's not a type of Club 33. I learned later from the same contact that there's an 11 as well, and supposedly the debauchery only grows as the number gets lower. I heard of a Club Zero, but I can't confirm that as clearly as I can with the previous contact. I also don't know if it has any connection to the room of similar name. Yes, the door said characters or cast members instead of mascots. I know, I hear you all. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure your memory is crystal clear in moments of abject terror, right? Overall, I'm glad my words have spread so far and wide. But the downside is that few of you are taking this seriously enough. I cannot stress this enough. Treasure Island? Real. The Utilidors? Real. Just because you can't substantiate the rest doesn't mean it's a cool story. Instead of picking apart the inaccuracies and making games about how cool it would have been to be in my position, maybe people can start taking this seriously and digging into what's going on. Maybe. I don't know, I don't want this to be a rant. I want to stay focused and make sure I post exactly what I wanted to make public. All the stress, the stalkers, the phone calls, the broken windows, I know that's all supposed to keep me off track. They want me confused, scared, and most of all, they want me quiet. There's a team of men and women in suits that I've seen at random times, here and there. I call them the focused group because they always pop up with clipboards and pens, taking notes about everything I do. They all have the same outfits, the same thick-rimmed nerd glasses, the same red pens that just scream, "We're judging you." The first time I noticed them, they were following me through the mall. I looped and turned, trying to be sure they were following me. And they were. Every step of the way. Days later, I spotted them again in the laundromat window across from my new apartment. I chased one down once, the tubbiest one. They stayed silent throughout the entire chase and even the scuffle that ensued. When I wrenched the clipboard from his hand, I only found page after page of off-kilter random gibberish coupled with crude Mickey silhouettes, all in the same red ink. I know it sounds insane to say that a group of men and women in black are following me and taking nonsense notes, but I think that's the point. I think the idea is that it should drive me insane, and if it doesn't, you'll still think I'm crazy for just saying it. It's a no-win situation. I will never forget that trip to Emerald Isle, but on the other hand, I'll always be grateful to people who have come forward anonymously to share their experiences with me. Whoever mailed me the suggestion box from the resort is basically my hero at this point. To read what I've written about the place and still brave the journey. Wow. I can't imagine how you felt, whoever you may be. You even left the original corroded lock in the box so I know it was legit. To do all of that without even taking a look inside for yourself must have been really hard. Thank you. If you hadn't noticed, I'm treating this post like my final installment. There's a reason for that. I don't know how long I can keep subverting Disney's attempts at silencing me before some sort of final action is taken. I have no doubt that somewhere at this very moment, someone is using my identity to commit a crime that would discredit me. That or the men in white jackets are about to show me a lovely little padded cell. I don't know what's going to come of this, and that's the worst part, I suppose. All I know is that it's coming. So, what is Corrupt Us? Well, as I mentioned, it was the title of an email I received, one that was presumably deleted along with my account. It was blank and seemed to exist for the sole purpose of placing an attached text document in my hands. Too bad for the powers that be, I had already printed it at the moment I saw it. Not much they can do to reverse that, can they? I should have mentioned, remember that library? I used their copier to run off a few thousand duplicates of that paper. A few hundred are stapled in random places, a few hundred were passed out to little people, and the rest. Let's leave those as a little surprise. Have fun trying to stifle that. Without any more rambling, here's the letter, word for word. It arrived from a source whose email address I won't disclose, though I assume it's an untraceable dummy account anyway. Summation of Corruptus incidents for January 2015. For office use only. This message contains information that may be confidential or proprietary, or protected by the attorney-client privilege or work product doctrine, intended solely for the use of the addresses named above. Any review, disclosure, distribution, copying, or use of the information by others is strictly prohibited. If you have received this message in error or without authorization, please advise the sender by immediate reply and delete the original message. All emails sent to this address will be received by the Disney corporate email system and is subject to archiving and review by someone other than the recipient. Violation of this disclaimer as written will result in prosecution. Please refer to official guidelines with relation to known and unconfirmed incident reports. Respect regulation as per ongoing and/or finalized designations. Known Corruptus incidents up to and including January 2015. Treasure Island. Extreme agitation, inappropriate activity within vulture population. Mild to moderate agitation / inappropriate human activity. Resolve Corruptus. Unidentified avian species. Abandoned. Final. Disney's Pop Century Resort. Misplaced immobile objects. Chronological displacement / anachronism. Unresolved Corruptus. Wandering entity. Pending. Disney's River County. Microorganism infestation. Unresolved Corruptus. Clear Man, aka See-Through Man, aka Friendly John. Abandoned. Final. ImageWorks. The What If Labs. Second floor. Multiple missing persons reports regarding Dreamfinder's School of Drama. Pin screen fatality. Vibrating mirror sickness. Unresolved Corruptus. Willy Wizard installation. Abandoned. Final. Mowgli's Palace. Auditory hallucination and/or projection. Misplaced in mobile objects. Moderate to severe agitation / inappropriate human activity. Unresolved Corruptus. Inverted character. Abandoned. Final. The New Global Neighborhood. Resolve Corruptus. Fiber optic worm. NGN-C1. Resolve Corruptus. Digital Howl. NGN-C2. Resolved. Repurposed. Room 0. Sudden onset of mass hysteria. Auditory hallucination and/or projection. Unresolved Corruptus. Unknown. Contained. Final. Please note, Nara Dreamland is not an officially licensed Disney park, and no information or resources are to be shared with any responsible for containing its residents. A complete list of suspected Corruptus incidents and reports may be available. It took a few reads before I could get my head around this. Essentially, if the attached file was to be believed, then the events I experienced were not part of an isolated incident. The events within Room 0, the Gascots, they seem like part of a much larger problem. What is Corruptus? Corruption. I mean, I don't need to run a Google Translate for that. Even I felt like I could take a break from writing about the risk of someone finding and disconnecting me at any moment. Corruption of what? Dreams? Ideas? Desires? I've never been a religious man, but I was dragged to Sunday school more than enough to know about the golden calves, false gods created by man, icons, graven images, characters, mascots. If you believe in the Bible at all, and I'm not sure I do, especially not after what I've seen, then maybe God wasn't angry because people worshipped other things. Maybe he was afraid. Maybe if enough people believe in something hard enough, there's a chance it will come to be. Since we're naturally flawed beings, that means there's a very good chance such a thing would become corrupted. If you think about it, Disney's animated films have always had one overriding message. Clap your hands and believe hard enough, and Tinkerbell will live. When you wish upon a star, anything your heart desires. People like to say that Disney has some connection to Satanism, but I never bought into that. I still don't. I think they've been trying to create that golden calf, a god idol that almost everyone believes in, one that everyone loves. It's almost as if any dream or idea that is shared by enough human hearts and minds has a chance of being born into the world. The creatures, if any exist beyond what I saw with my own eyes, I think they're the deformed half-starts, random manifestations of some dark, unquantifiable non-life that seeped into our state of being. They're the mistakes of reality, eldritch abominations, cosmic abortions, the corrupted. Did everyone in Emerald Isle harbor such a negative impression of Mowgli's palace? How potent was the fear of nuclear war on the day Room Zero became full? If you want to find gascots and mystery voices, does that search bring about the very thing you're looking for? How many children have been disappointed, confused, or scarred for life when they saw Mickey without his head? These are questions I'm never going to be able to answer. I don't know if anyone can. Speaking personally, this will probably be the last time I talk to you about Disney and everything I learned about them. I'm truly sorry for that, especially since there's so much more I could say. Unconfirmed rumors, documents, and items I received that now seem to be gone forever. I thought they were just trying to contain that Mickey costume. I thought that's why they went out of their way to keep the public in the dark about it so much. Why they coerced and bullied to get their way. Now I realize I was wrong. They didn't want anything like this getting out. I wish you all good luck, and I know I need the same from you. Thank you.